Welcome. Today's post is International Sports, the Other Football. Published on January 3, 2023. Ever notice the odd relationship in history that football, known as soccer in the US, and American football have? Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button, and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts, and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. I'm not into sports, but understanding them unlocks much of the comms world. Not just understanding the sports themselves but the trends. Like how football and baseball switched places in popularity. Why is that? What I found most interesting about this is how soccer isn't even charted. The most popular sport in the world by a large measure is soccer. Soccer/football. Notice a pattern. More than half is association football, which in the USA is called soccer. Isn't that odd? America alone obsesses over a football league as the most popular sport in the world, and yet the most popular sport everywhere else has that same name but is an entirely different game. Don't misunderstand, there are foreign American football leagues, but I'm talking about the biggest sports of the country as represented by money spent and media promoted. What's even more curious about this is the highest revenue of all of them is American NFL and MLB, but in the global scale these are outliers. The first of many soccer leagues is ranked fourth in revenue. I've made quite a few posts on sports already, but while I had cracked a few comms I never dug up the origin. That is until now. The original purpose of professional sports. The quickest way to describe the answer I found is this: British colonization. July 20, 1871, British Columbia joins the Confederation of Canada, monarch rule. July 20, 1871, Challenge Cup established FA. Note the spread of the empire across Canada right at the start of it. The first football league began in 1888, note the spread of the British Empire during these years. Football leagues pop up across the world right after that. Why? I believe this was the point of the first league, was to keep land in hand. Notice how the relative popularity of soccer is tied to the acceptance of British rule in a territory. How rugby/cricket became popular in places where Britain was rejected. That spells it out right there. Running teams like this would give updates on how happy the citizenry were with British rule. Able to change tacks rather than let people's anger ferment. Otherwise they would kick Britain like the whole American Revolution thing. It also acts as a unifying force that puts areas at odds with one another instead of the monarchy that conquered them. Rivalry between one city and another rather than everyone united against the government. Though that's just my cursory take. I'm confident in the basic idea, but I'm not familiar enough with sports to say all the ways in which it would benefit them. I go over sports comms frequently as they send all sorts of messaging, and this gives us an understanding of the original point. In more modern times it is used as a comms channel. Through the consistent reporting of seasons, news coordinates plans among citizenry to various goals. These aren't necessarily all evil. But, the further back I go I tend to be more biased to think comms represent exploitation. In my sports post I go over positive ones from the past, and as I overcome bias I'm sure I'll find more and more. I don't have that problem for recent comms, and in my last few posts there are all sorts of sports comms going on that are clearly highly positive. Check my last post in the Updates section if you want a refresher on this. Anyway, returning to the original symbol. The first international sports game gives a clue. January 31, 1863. 5 Weeks in a Balloon by Jules Verne first published. February 3, 1863. Samuel Clemens first uses the pen name Mark Twain in a Virginia city newspaper, the Territorial Enterprise. November 1872. First international football match. November 1872. Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. A novel about quickly going around the world. Akin to propping up sports leagues around the world. Moreover, the author, Jules, happens to be the name of the original FIFA trophy. This could be coincidence. But notice the name of it. Winged goddess in flight. FIFA as the top, possible meaning. Fi. Fa. Equals taking position of a debtor, a term in the 1800s that it became slang for a sheriff. Going after someone with the law. Rule of the land. One way to get rid of anyone not cooperating. In order to fully confirm the symbolism of sports was originally to keep control of territories. We need to talk about another way comms were sent using famous scientists and authors. In my particle physics post I go into how the many patents of Albert Einstein, that became nothing, were used to send messaging covertly about progress on military projects. This doesn't mean Einstein by himself did this. In fact, one of the many reveals decoding history has brought me is that these super famous geniuses in history are simply the face of teams that unite under one name for a variety of reasons. Not the least of which is safety to protect the top minds of a country. This is why in One Piece the character symbolizing Einstein splits himself up into 6 satellites. Uniting many people to build something bigger rather than having 100 names attached to 100 stories/inventions giving them all to one. A modern example of this is likely Stephen King, as his name will sell any book. This was necessary preamble because we need to talk about Mark Twain. Twain. So. FIFA is the biggest sports competition in the world and the oldest professional one. When was the first FIFA predecessor cup? November 11, 1871. First Football World Championship Cup, FIFA predecessor. December 19, 1871. Mark Twain received his first patent for suspenders. Suspenders, as in symbol of keeping something from falling. A message of a new way to keep as in a country from falling. Remember how the soccer success story was tied to British colonization, this was the culmination of that. A new method to keep all the territories happy. You may rightly assert that Mark Twain is famous for being an American author. Why British comms? That was the interesting part. His first major success though was a story about a celebrated jumping frog. Curiously it was published the same week a famous UK story with a pen name, but that is probably coincidence. November 18, 1865, Mark Twain publishes first major work celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County becomes international hit. November 26, 1865, Alice in Wonderland first published. What's interesting about this is the symbolism here. Jump plus celebrated plus America. First success as a writer is a book about a celebrated jump. I decoded jump symbolism extensively in the last post, and I was confident it symbolized international movement. Celebrated equals expected popularity. Changes name to Mark Twain to make it more American. Note also the location of the place is the word for skulls plural. As in many people. With this in mind, take a look at some of his early books, and you realize they are all stuffing in as much America as possible. The thing he's most referred to as being the quintessential American author that would fit perfectly with the market filling they had and explains why he became internationally famous while others couldn't get anywhere. People were likely flooded with British books given their position globally in distribution over sea and control. Meanwhile, USA had a better reputation in all sorts of ways that would make it a logical scam for the most powerful nation on earth, at the time, to commandeer that notoriety and fill the position with their own plant. A quintessential American, and so they used it as an umbrella to launch things for the people who had created a demand internationally for American fiction. It was a market spot to fill, and they wanted to control it, at least that's my take. Note his connection to Halley's Comet. November 1835, Halley's Comet brightest point. November 1835, Mark Twain birth. April 21, 1910, Mark Twain dies. Halley's Comet begins and ends. Quote. April 20, 1910, Halley's Comet reaches brightest. In the film note that after death a message was sent that the rumors of his demise are greatly exaggerated. Well, if his name was an umbrella then the end of that would just mean those people involved would move on to something else. Comet equals come plus T, church, cooperation of ops which at the time began using church to coordinate. Given his life was tied to Halley's Comet, then it means that this comet symbol may have been used as a symbol for other groups of people coming together and splitting apart. March 13, 1986. First approach of Halley's Comet by satellite. August 13, 1986. Microsoft has public offering, IPO of the year. Fits the same way. As Microsoft going public was tied to Tandy Corporation and the TRS-80, the first mainstream proto-internet machine. Which may or may not have been government-tied. Switching from government-controlled satellites into shells that would be independent. This might be why there was a news story around that time of a 10th planet discovered. August 4, 1977. DOE founded, Q clearance. October 1, 1977. DOE activated responsibility for nuclear weapons program. October 18, 1977. DOE agreement to move to Colorado. October 18, 1977. Discovery of 10th planet in solar system. Date given. November 6, 1977. Hyde Memorial Observatory dedicated. November 9, 1977. Johnny Carson discusses the mysterious object beyond Saturn. Discovered the same day the new DOE department decided to move nuclear materials to Colorado. This didn't become a planet, but it being given that scope originally is meaningful. Anyway, this concept of how soccer is used globally. Note the logo of the One in Mexico League. The most successful Mexican team won, Eagles plus CIA logo. Note the team is owned by Televisa, modern name, early name was Telesistema Mexicano. March 26, 1955. The adoption. Ralph and Alice adopt a baby, honeymooners. March 26, 1955. Mexican Telesystem founded, owns CIA soccer logo. Adoption being a new iteration. Given honeymooners being the biggest show of its time meant symbols of importance were tied to the media which the CIA was tied to. Moreover, a new baby is a new iteration of them would be akin to the control over media. As in the broadcaster being set up in Mexico, the one that would buy the CIA-like logo team. Also the symbolism of the soccer ball itself. Pigskin equals ham radio comms. This is about passing messages. August 20, 1920. First regularly broadcasted news radio show. September 26, 1920. NFL first event. October 3, 1920. First official pro NFL game. Might be nothing, but it's interesting to look at foreign news around this time. September 26, 1920. Russia converts Aviation Technical College into Institute of Air Fleet. Tied to development of NASA. September 26, 1920. NFL first event. The same day the NFL went from college games to professional. Russia reorganized a college into a proto-NASA Air Force Institute. The same kind NASA would be later modeled after. That's highly speculative, but I am confident it's tied to media control, which is necessary to send any messaging. 1888 radio demonstration leads to widespread adoption of new communication tech. 1888 first pro soccer game with inflated sheep/pig bladder, sheep equals follow. Note the designs that while both are pigskin or sheep/pig bladder, they are quite different. The soccer ball tying into television plus phone call communications satellite. This reinforces the ham radio connection as that is the natural evolution from radio to TV. Ma Bell symbol. Note the former commissioner's name Bert Bell. Which may have been used to signify control by what entity, though that's far from a certainty. The visual design on the soccer hand is pentagon. The military symbol defense, as the foreign threat which ties into what was going on at the time. The invasion of European soccer teams. Literally teams from South America and UK given American names in an effort to get Americans to invest. These leagues had mixed successes, and this takeover league evolved into NASL, which turned into today's MLS. Note the soccer wars. I'm not sure which team represents which yet, but I'll get there. I do know the origin being UK must connect to some important media comms of that time. What was the biggest media event of the 18th century? April 17, 1888. English Football League, EFL, the oldest comp in world till 1992. -13. April 4, 1888. Jack the Ripper timeline begins. Emma Smith local prostitute dead found by Reeves. Time to the start of Jack the Ripper op. Oldest competition in the world coincidentally stated 13 days after Jack the Ripper, the biggest international news story for decades. I don't think that's coincidental. The name of the man who began the news story, Reeves. Newspaper story. In my Reeves post I discuss how this ties into Superman, as his job as newspaper reporter is key to his symbolism. The original two Superman actors were both played by Reeves. September 19, 1952. Adventures of Superman starring George Reeves debut. September 25, 1952. Christopher Reeve born. Check my Reeves post for more on that connection. The short answer is likely ties into media stardom. Flight. The most popular sport in the world is tied to media control. When did Superman begin? April 1938. Superman debut. 04///30-1938. Porky's Hare Hunt Bug's first appearance. April 30, 1938. FA Cup, Pig Skin, first televised predecessor to FIFA. The largest international sports comp. Preston equals press ton. Symbol of tons of coverage. This fits with it being the first to be televised as well as Superman. It defines media control. The fact they could get it aired across the country is a powerful thing back in 1938. That's not the only comms being sent, but it seems to be a show of string partially. What's interesting about this is, Press, Ton North End was the winners of the FA Cup when the league began. Which itself may symbolize a control of media. We can see this even stronger with the most popular league. Note when they broke apart and reformed. 1888 Football League, ends 1992. February 20, 1992. Premier League top teams split away from the 1988 Football League for lucrative TV rights from Sky. February 20, 1992. Ross Perot CNN Larry King announced running. February 21, 1992. Power Rangers Japan series first dinosaur-themed and first exported to USA. This is when Bush was kicked down by an international coalition, and so this tearing down the top league and building a new one the same day Ross Perot began. The Power Rangers point may seem odd, but if you may remember in prior posts the Japan to United States comms going on with dinosaurs in the early 90s, so while it may look odd it checks out as a symbol for this. Especially as the symbol is just like a soccer team working together. Check my DNA post for more on that one. The important part is the league being torn apart, as this is when the press turned hard against H.W. Bush. It lends to the idea that the soccer teams were tied to media control. Japanese baseball. I'll return to soccer, but let's take a detour as it can help clarify the larger point of sports. Note one of the rare outliers in soccer domination is Japan's baseball league. It's almost in the top 10 for leagues and barely edged out by the US Soccer League. Why is baseball king in Japan? Well, how did it become king? What made it popular? In this post I go into how Babe Ruth was tied to the surge of popularity in Japan. Babe Ruth symbolism is tied to blackmail. Babe as in a child or attractive woman. Define rut. As in an animal blinded by lust. Check my particle post linked above for more on this, but the point is the Japanese league began right after Babe Ruth's tour hyped up the country for it. Gave them a taste of the power of celebrity. February 7, 1936. Felix the Cat animated film released by Van Buren Studios licensed from Otto Messmer. February 5, 1936. Nippon Pro Baseball, $1 billion industry begins. This might be coincidence, but I took notice for a few reasons. I've decoded Felix the Cat, and this connection may finally explain the prevalence of Hello Kitty as a symbol in Japan. Hello Kitty originally had no name and no mouth. No identity or way to speak, and was named by Alice in Wonderland. Kitty as a double meaning here for coin purse. The no mouth likely symbolizing not talking, especially when we consider the Alice in Wonderland origin, as those comms are strongly attached to preying on girls. A story about a girl having an adventure while asleep, because drugging a girl is one way predators mitigate risk of the victim being able to know they were in fact a victim. Felix the cat was also tied to Alice in Wonderland in its origin, tied to Disney. It's also the name of the KGB head of the same time frame. Given KGB is tied to blackmail, this fits together, and it may clarify the connection between the KGB and cooperation from Japan. I'm not really sure of all the nuances, but I do suspect the comms tied to the Beatles' Lenin were to invoke Lenin as a Soviet symbol, and so Lenin choosing Yoko Ono, Japan, over McCartney/Ringo may be tied to it. Also interesting is that band manager name that is tied to the breakup. April 10, 1970, Beatles breakup date John Lennon/Paul McCartney. April 11, 1970, Apollo 13 rescue mission begins. December 10, 1970, New York Cosmos founded, most popular early U.S. soccer team with Pele attached. 1977 moved to Giants Stadium. Anyway, this data point ties into FIFA, so let's return to that trophy as it connects strongly. Nike and Pele. A trophy that was permanently won by Brazil due to winning 3 FIFA Cups. These were the 3 cups Pele played in. Speaking of which, he died this week. The King, the first international soccer star. King Pele. The first global soccer icon. What did he symbolize? His last game hitting the same day the Department of Energy opened its doors. Cue clearance. Transition to a new game. Named King by a Brazilian playwright when he was 17 that ushered in a new theater era for Brazil. A man who specializes in films about censorship, incest, and child murder. About a mother killing her children one at a time as husband ignores it. Sacrifice symbolism, and for him to tie into Pele gives us a direction. He was the youngest ever, and that name of his, pronounced Pei plus Lay, seems to be comms of the blackmail/MK world. Note his first wife during that time was named Rosemary, note the necklace she wears. Rosemary Combs. A famous horror movie about a woman who wears a cursed necklace and gets involved with a sex cult. Husband sells her body to further his Hollywood career. Roman Polanski tied to Tate, who was killed by the Manson gang. The point of invoking this with Pele? Could be symbol for the kinds of ops tied to him. Assassination. Speaking of which, when I looked up the major dates, one jumped out at me. Remember that FIFA is the big international governing body of the biggest sport in the world. June 24, 1914, United States Soccer Federation FIFA full membership. June 28, 1914, Air 9 Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria dead kicks off WW1. Joining the international community of soccer, and the next day they are ready for WW1. Might it be a handshake for cooperation? With the USA in pocket, they felt confident about starting it. What happened just before this? Setting up the Federal Reserve. The body that loans the money for war. Who makes money off that? Titanic was what gave us the Federal Reserve, as it killed off the final resistance to it. When did that happen? April 14, 1912, Santos/Fish, Pele team founded. April 14, 1912, Titanic sinking, sleep with the fishes. The same day Pele's team started. This explains why Santos would be given special treatment in the comms world. Symbolizing the ops that brought in the Federal Reserve and killed so many. Recent news with the same name, Santos, pointed out by a reader. Might be nothing, just interesting given Santos star died this week. So, one oddity about all of this is why USA football is such an outlier. Note how much money is involved compared to the far more prominent soccer clubs. NFL industry revenue is $18 billion this year. $17 billion above, as it's an older stat, that's more than double the highest soccer club. So this brings me to what makes the USA unique compared to other countries. Reserve currency. The financial power moving from UK to USA. That makes the printing of money different from other countries as it defines the value everywhere. December 27, 1958. Bretton Woods fully operational. December 28, 1958. Greatest game ever played. Sudden death overtime. Greatest game ever played just so happened to be the day after Bretton Woods. A famously long game, as perhaps the symbol tying American football to funding ops. Note football became the top sport with a rapid increase in ratings from 1950 to 1970, switching places with baseball as the top sport around the time of the Super Bowl. Superb owl. Note the design choices of Washington. The owl and the egg. This could define the uniqueness of American football as it's the only reserve currency. What kinds of things are funded? March 23, 2010. NFL sudden death less sudden, live longer. March 23, 2010. Obamacare signed into law. Symbol of extending life with Obamacare. Comms of support for the system by the NFL. The main thing is NFL promotion of Obamacare with comms equals agreeing of powerful people to go in the direction of Obamacare. A symbol for those with strings in the NFL to say, yes, and it announces it loudly. That's one of many reasons these comms are used and why they are flexible. Moreover, it's an agreement to print oodles of money. It's all contextual. Sudden death, by saying, less sudden, it works as a symbol in this specific context but wouldn't work in any other. This is why it's impossible to do what so many try, and decode like it were reading a page of a book they hadn't read in order. You have to understand the situation. Sports is my weakest subject, but if I keep testing hypothesis I'm sure I'll get a precise understanding. We can trace the control of these teams to major companies. Like Walmart buying the Broncos or Kraft Group owning the New England Patriots. The Dolphins were owned by Blockbuster Video in their heyday. I had already decoded them tied to the ratings of various shows and remote control, and this works here. If I spend some time building database of owners with ties that I've already answered, it could probably give some clarity on the larger affiliations. The point is this concept of companies banding together in a league and then coordinating for larger goals. What kinds of ways might you symbolize these production facilities? What kind of symbolism could be used to represent a coordinated workshop of products? October 24, 1857. First football club founded. December 26, 1857. First appearance of elves as helpers to Santa. The employment of elves in a workshop. The elves in a workshop act as a parallel to a production factory after all. What else could they possibly represent? They are designed in most iterations to mirror a production line. It's not even decoding, but the important part is implication. If you remember the start of the post, then you remember that soccer clearly symbolized the UK creating stronger holds on territories. July 20, 1871. British Columbia joins the Confederation of Canada, monarch rule. July 20, 1871. FA Challenge Cup established, FIFA predecessor. Take these points together, and they make even more sense. How else could they monitor/employ? It's a natural extension of setting up industry. They allowed the industry to thrive in relation to the benefit that came back to the crown, which in this case the goal was to utilize sporting competitions to monitor and herd the populace to avoid another American Revolution in some place they would soon set up shop like all across Africa. Additionally, if we understand the elves represent companies, then the natural conclusion is that the company begins by being funded to produce merchandise and hire employees. How do companies begin? Loans? Where do those come from? Back to the banks. Which itself is what controlled the crown. I can't speculate too much as I'm a novice on finance, but when we examine the symbolism involved, a few pressing questions appear. Who is Santa? Why do they take orders from him? Perhaps we can find an answer in a recent film that was requested a few weeks ago. Fat Man. A movie about Santa Claus and his elves being funded by the US government. A plot about Santa being hunted by an assassin financed by a rich child upset at getting coal. The naughty child, Santa, and the assassin are the three main characters, and the film begins with the rich child. Billy is shown to always win contests and promises to keep winning with the intent of getting his father's approval. We then switch to Mel Gibson as Fat Man shooting trash and talking about being desperate for money. I can't recall any other iteration of Santa being poor, but remember when this movie came out? Late 2020. The height of COVID. What did the entire world shutting down do to the production industry? Well, the sentence answers itself, doesn't it? Companies were being squeezed in all sorts of ways, and it was intended to put pressure for cooperation with the US government. Going after the bottom line of companies. That's what happens here. You may also have drawn a parallel with the hiring a killer plot point to the point of COVID shutdowns. As that was the point, check COVID posts for more on that. This film is sending comms about the ops to shut down the contract killings, and so let's see what the film has to say about it. So the whole impetus for revenge stems from the naughty child losing a science fair project. His African hydroelectric power project losing to a braces-wearing girl with solar-powered trains. I'm sure there's a comm in there about visibility and restraint, but let's move on. It switches to the third main character of the film, which is the assassin Billy hires to remove his competition. He has a hobby of buying objects brought by Santa Claus. A baseball bat he received, which led to him almost becoming a pro player before injury took that dream away. He wishes to fund his daughter's trip to space camp with the baseball bat. Objects made by Santa in this universe are apparently special, and they exist not just as toys but gateways into dream careers. This fits with what we see later in the film as Santa looks at thank you letters from adults who by the gift of Santa became their dream careers. This is all to say, Santa, in this universe and in our own, can represent not the parents giving toys to children but instead the paths of children into careers. The comms world. Moreover, the whole symbol of factories being involved could just as easily represent future career paths. Anyway, the Santa helping fund dreams are tied to him trading his baseball dream for his daughter's trip to space camp. If you read my last post, you remember how space camp is used in comms. Specifically, it denotes a future star. NASA equals space flight. Space camp equals training for a kid to be shot into the sky, becoming a star. So the kid gets runner-up, and this is what triggers him to hire a murderer. We are shown how he goes about getting contact information to kidnap the girl. All of this making the threat very real. This is a thing that happens, rich people funding threats and murders so as to remove and take over competition. Fat Man hears news of all the bad things happening with kids burning each other up and gets a check from the US government for his present delivery services to good kids. This is juxtaposed with the naughty child stealing money from his grandmother. Symbolic of how black ops are funded. With it all paid for, he then proceeds to terrorize the girl with the threat of using a car battery, driving, to make her teeth chatter. He forces her to humiliate herself so that he can win the competition. Meanwhile, due to all the naughty kids, Mel Gibson's present delivery service is way down in revenue. Revenue specifically tied to US government funding. This represents the COVID killing all the industry. A task specifically stated in film to force cooperation of Santa to the US government. Instead of shutting him down, he is made to cooperate. This mirrors so much of what I've decoded about COVID ops. How do they help? Well, the major thing is a cooperation of businesses around the world to mitigate the secret contract killing. This includes the training and usage of child murderers. That's what COVID tracking was all about. This hostage situation here is exactly what I discussed in my last post and many others. There are a ton of big and small entities sending comms about it all the time. The biggest gamer on YouTube, for example. I've gone over those comms in a few posts, most notably the video they did referencing escaping from hostage situations. In fact, notice the date of the film. It was released the same day the end of the Eunice and Us countdown ended. November 13, 2020. Fatman, Mel Gibson. November 13, 2020. Eunice and Us year-long countdown ends with fully deleted channel. November 13, 2020. Donda. Eunice and Us was a project on YouTube that involved Markiplier making videos daily for a year with the intent stated from the start of deleting them all on the last day. Note the lead up to the deleting. Everything's legal if you're dead, referencing the dead ops but not really. Ducking law enforcement by faking deaths, it's a major thing going on as a way to clean house around the world as it removes some of the safety measures in place that prevent global takedowns. Faces that are tied to illegal ops, that is. You can't arrest the Queen of England or Prince Philip without it becoming an international catastrophe for all sorts of reasons, but you can have them die, and once removed the illegal ops they were implicated in can be cleanly and silently taken care of. So before they agree to work with the federal government they try and finance through China and Elon Musk. These are both entities cooperating with military ops, so it doesn't work. 2020 is when Musk became the richest man in the world and was working with the Air Force as well as China. It's when he was at his heaviest work with the governments of China and USA through SpaceX and Tesla. Santa makes his rounds in spite of this looming emergency. Obviously, because the kid took the girl hostage with stolen money, he gets a lump of coal. This causes him to next hire the killer again, this time for Santa Claus. Coal. Speaking of coal. December 2, 2014, Joel the lump of coal by the killer's YouTube 1 million. December 2, 2014, Product Twitter announces a new suite of anti-harassment tools and promises faster response times for abuse complaints. The symbol tied to naughty kids. First thing that came up in searches was this meme song from Jimmy Kimmel. Same day Twitter gets widely reported anti-harassment tools, ways to let Twitter know about naughty kids. Not really anything to decode there, just seemed to be timed intentionally. But why coal? I'm not actually sure about this one, but another symbol of coal is the commonly reported lie that pressure turns coal into diamonds. Most commonly pushed by Superman. Remember that Superman equals news reporter. Does the press apply pressure? That's one of the main things they do. Unless you want to suggest Nixon wasn't under pressure for Watergate. Moreover, diamonds equals stars symbol. Which is another thing newspapers do. They were the primary conduit of creating stars before TV took over. So read that again. Coal equals naughty kids. The newspaper applies pressure to coal, naughty person, and creates diamonds, stardom. You can read that many ways, as the star could be the naughty kid, or if we go the Nixon route, the ones that took him down. Either way, their fuel is the naughty which they report. It's not necessarily evil, but can be in certain contexts. Anyway, Santa agrees to work with the US government for funding. The assassin takes his frustration out using karate. An MK symbol I've discussed. It fits with the whole story of a child employing murderers. Kids have special protection from tracking, which is why there are all sorts of ops kids are a part of that adults stay clear of. Having the children be surveilled by the government contractors might be a new thing. Santa has information on every person in the world as shown in several parts, and it's only at the very end he decides to keep constant surveillance on the children hiring killers. Anyway. The work with the government upgrades security. This is when COVID was at the height. Killer hornets and whatnot. Notice this video was also 2020, and the comms laid out precisely how takeovers happen with murder hornets. Occupation after being invaded by a foreign insurgent. And so a hotline set up to report and remove them. The US military contracts Santa to make control panels for planes. Upgrading security is essential to this goal. The point of making a control panel is in working on getting a handle on the murderers. The naughty. This is why juxtaposed to this the murderer continues to Santa's workshop and buys a toy plane from a child. He shows off his child abuse scars and listens to a song with lyrics about 187s. These are some of the building blocks to creating killers. It's worth mentioning that earlier in the film the child was upset at his father getting him a teddy bear. If you read my e-post you know this symbol ties into sexual abuse, just like the cigarette butts the killer shows. The funder of the killers is also tied into this cycle of abuse. Then the film has a discussion of bad nutrition. The elves eat nothing but sugar all day. This might just be jokes, though I would like to think this concept of pushing a high-sugar diet is something that can be corrected. It is another building block to creating an unhealthy child. I get that selling more is better for businesses, but it's short-sighted when contrasted with society as a whole. Though I suppose if we view those above us as more akin to parasites it isn't. Though I would think they wouldn't want to be viewed that way. I can't help but pause and consider what society would be if instead of nonsense and garbage the populace were nudged into better habits. Surely there is a way to have both that and not bankrupt every major company in the world. The growth in a better direction would yield a different reward but not necessarily inferior. Just because you built a world of selling garbage for kids to choke on doesn't mean the kids would stop eating if stopped. I'm sure that sounds childish to some, or that it can't be that simple. There is a reason for the horrible state of mental and physical health. One of the reasons I decode is to try and get to the bottom of why the world is the way it is. Anyway, the mention of the US government backing Santa into a corner for cooperation is again reiterating the ops involvement of companies. There's another level to it too, because they needed that perception so as to be less likely as targets. It's probably different when you cooperate with an entity for the good of mankind and get a target for it versus when you are forced to go along with it. In the latter case targeting is entirely illogical as they are forced into it. They can't be scared into stopping as they would otherwise collapse. My point is by framing it this way it protects those involved as you can't scare them into stopping. At least that's my take at a glance. The killer buys a hamster. Symbolism much like a guinea pig. A symbol of an experiment lab rat animal that is conditioned into a behavior. Which is to say the symbolism here is of a brainwashed killer being sent as a suicide bomber. This is why Santa is used, as we have talked of him knowing who everyone is. The unique ability to identify the dangerous ones. Hunting down the people who are off the map. Much like those with fake deaths. Discussion of him riding a Ford, which is the same brand from Mad Max, but I'll go into that later. Notice the outfit procured by the killer. He doesn't want a duck canvas, but picks all white, as invisible. Duck equals avoiding consequences. The kid gets his award and then calls, potentially to call off the hit, but not stopping, calm I've gone over in other posts. Under attack and very visible. Only thing ever received a cop car. Symbol of arrests. The naughty kid then goes to kill grandparent for trying to track down his crime. The money stolen to buy the hitman. Santa asserts that from now on he's going to be proactive and turn things around, that there won't be any more contract killings. How? Because Santa asserts he will have his eye on him. To that effect, note how they moved the hamster the villain bought inside the workshop. Symbol of watching the MK world. This ties into the very last scene of the film which has Mrs. Claus trying to get her elves to eat all the cookies. Tracking symbol. So overall this whole film involves him taking on tracking the dangerous individuals at risk of activation. So who precisely is keeping track then? Part of the answer is companies as we already went over that, but who is Santa? I think the answer can be contextual and that there are many, but I also think this film is describing a specific Santa to keep track of these ops by its title. Who are we discussing when we talk about Fatman? And the little boy? Did that phrasing give a clue on my take? If you've read my nuclear post already understand what I'm getting at. Fatman equals Russia. Check my nuclear post if that's confusing. The short answer to why is because nuclear weapons are used as symbolism for booms. As in the invasion of Japan by Russia equals nuclear bomb. The code name for this was Fat Man. This doesn't mean there was no bombing of Nagasaki, only that it was firebombing and the boom that ended the war was the threat of Russian invasion. Specifically them breaking their treaty with Japan not to invade, that's why it was such a big boom. Note how Russia was given equal or greater billing than the nuke. The point of using the nuke is because it's a framework for booms. As in the entire operation/funding necessary to achieve it. You can't fund aiding communist spies easily, but you can fund a magic bomb that can be funneled into the hands of Soviets who would then agree to burn their treaty. Just, read the Nuclear Post if that's new. There's a million other aspects of this that confirms it from 100 other angles. Therefore, using the symbol, Fat Man, in this context is Russia taking on ops to invade just as Santa does in promise for covert funding from the USA by newly flipped Federal Reserve. In exchange, they offer a layer of protection by monitoring threats in the MK world. So, why Mel Gibson? Did you know he had a Russian wife? July 9, 2010. Gibson recordings of rant towards Russian wife leads to being dropped from agency Morris Endeavor. July 9, 2010. US-Russian spy swap 14 spies. Note the executive produced her music back from Russia, and was timed to the Russian spy swap that lost him his agency. Let me reiterate that, she had a song called Back from Russia, and the news is timed to spies going back to Russia. I mean, that's transparent, and yet even though it's obvious I can't tell you what it means. A marker or message surely, I may need to decode it further in a future post, but at the very least it demonstrates Mel Gibson has been used to send messaging about Russian spy ops. However, his connection with Russia seems to be more about his wife, so what did he symbolize originally? Gibson. What are the defining characteristics of Mel Gibson in pop culture? His most famous roles, Mad Max franchise/Lethal Weapon franchise, are tied into playing a violent suicidal psychopath. South Park portrayed him as a psychopath, and even his real life has been tied to violence and lunacy. So it's safe to say whatever his symbol invokes, it's psychological, and when I dug into his filmography this became clear from the start. His big break was the film Mad Max. A film famous for many reasons. It was the most profitable movie of all time for almost 20 years. Specifically, it made lots of money internationally. It was also banned in New Zealand due to the scene with Gibson burning a man alive, as it paralleled a real event that happened just before release. A coincidence? Mel Gibson is said to have gotten the role due to being beaten up the night before audition. Note the movie was said to have actual biker gangs in it. A banned film? Reconcile all of these points with Mel Gibson famously being insane. It all adds up to a symbol of MK Ops. But that's a large umbrella, so we can get a lot more specific on what he symbolizes if we dig into these films. Mad Max. When I looked up the major dates associated with the film, I noticed an odd date for the soundtrack. October 26, 1993. Mad Max soundtrack. October 26, 1993. Crash Test Dummies, God Shuffled His Feet. The most famous song of it being a set of 3 stories talking about children in isolation and pain. The first being in a car crash. Mad Max is a film about insane driving and car crashes, so this, along with their whole name, Crash Test Dummies, setting up someone to crash. Driving comms are how MK Ops are described. Mad Max was a movie filmed at the end of 1977 right as Q clearance and the MK hearing was starting. I go over this period of time frequently as it involved a major change in how surveillance was handled by those involved with ops. Mad Max having success almost entirely overseas in record-breaking fashion, I believe, is tied to the pushing of driving cells. As in wealthy backers overseas financing guerrillas. Mad Max acting as the marker/promotion. A way to let comms-aware families that they can get into the driving game. The story begins, a few years from now, and has a police officer of the future spying on people having sex with a rifle. Note his name is Big Bopper, a man who died in a famous Day the Music Died, just like how the film was written by a Kennedy. I believe part of the symbolism here is tied to 187 ops. The motives for the film are not always easy to unpack, but the apocalyptic scenario and horrific plot of torture for both good and bad guys means that even though we have protagonists, we can't readily assume the film agrees with either side. For example, the first show of the cop spying on sex with a rifle, he then finds it amusing when they run. This strikes me as negative commentary on the types of spycraft going on that led to Q clearance and changing of ops. The sign says, monitored by main force patrol with force replaced by farce. As in making light of government monitoring. I'm reminded of Bill Gates in 1977, his famous speeding, same month this film was finishing being filmed. Moving from New Mexico to Seattle, port. Same timeframe he helped program the TRS-80, which was unique for having the first proto-internet. This was used by at least one cult group the CIA founded, Finders, to communicate across the country. A group noted for ferrying naked and abused children to Mexico. Check my Finders post for more on that. Anyway, on the radio they pick up news of the cop killing Knight Rider. Childishly, the police squabble over who gets to drive the car as they hunt psychopaths. It's all presented as a game to them, whether spying on sex or murder. This gives us a good clue that authority is not the protagonist here. This is Knight Rider, and he has death tattooed on his feet, and with his out driving the cops they crash. The lunatic Knight Rider, cruising at the speed of fright, he defines himself as a fuel-injected suicide machine. Which is to say, this seems to represent the fear pushed by wielding psychopaths. The cops on the other hand accidentally kill civilians in the case and act like children that might get grounded. We're really gonna get it this time, as another cop in a diner, Goose, talks about how by the time they made a rescue the victim was trying to scream despite having their face ripped off. All of this painting a miserable existence. The pursuit nearly kills a child, which causes the police car to crash, killing one of them. Once again, constant repetition of him being the Knight Rider, fuel-injected suicide machine. These are people conditioned from birth to be weapons. This escaped criminal constantly promotes himself and asserts he is the hand of vengeance. He talks of a toe cutter that knows who he is. This leads to Mel Gibson coming straight towards him, and after playing chicken he suddenly loses his nerves. Mel Gibson gets behind the now terrified man and pushes him into a crash. Even though he dies here, the whole plot of the movie involves the fallout of this. Effectively, the gang tied to Knight Rider takes vengeance for him, which of course puts Mel Gibson in the crosshairs. The next part shows his wife and child. His child holding a card of Diamond, Manchurian Candidate, and his wife playing the sax. Her first thing to discuss with Mel Gibson is that her baby is a monster and attacked her. It's all said as a joke, but as a calm note, the baby is said to take after Mel Gibson. The very next scene has the baby playing with a gun. The baby holds a gun, and she replies to him, "Crazy about you." That's a lot of symbolism pushed about someone going crazy, and it keeps going. He leaves to go check out a turbocharged car. It's the duck's guts, he is told, and that it was put together from all over the place. Duck equals avoiding consequences. This is why MK ops are used after all, as they achieve the desired goal without putting the funder at risk of exposure. Let's talk about what Mel Gibson symbolizes. 13. The Gibson. What is a Gibson? October 10, 1902, Gibson Guitars founded. October 10, 1902, Tom Horn famous trial after killing 17 men. Becomes folklore. Guitar equals pulling strings. Symbol of control, and when tied to murderer symbolism implies control over crazy people. The point being, Mel Gibson famously being crazy is a part of his symbolism, and that explains the name. What about his wife? August 5, 1957, Joanne Samuel, Mad Mac's wife. August 5, 1957, American Bandstand premieres. Top-rated ABC program that lasts for 37 seasons. The symbolism of playing a crazy guitar, i.e., Gibson, tied to murder. From that you might expect Mel Gibson to be manipulative, but that's not what is going on here. Mel Gibson becomes insane over the course of the film. He is the one that is so crazy he scares the crazy people. What drives him crazy? The threats on his life, and the gang taking vengeance for Knight Rider. Goose giving a get-out-of-jail-free card. More examples of the film viewing the lawful side as corrupt. The toe cutter gang tries and find a replacement for Knight Rider, and Gibson's partner is forced to let loose on their associates due to inability to charge them with crimes. The toe cutter gang decides to kill more cops to honor Knight Rider. All of this leads to Gibson's partner Goose being cooked. This is where Gibson's sanity takes a stronger nosedive. Says he is literally starting to enjoy going crazy after his partner is cooked to near death. Remember, he was already so crazy that he played chicken with the cop killing Knight Rider and freaked him out to his death. Anyway, his one link to staying sane is his wife. Of course, when she goes, that's when he snaps, but let's not get ahead. For now, she acts as a brace, and he enjoys himself. Giving a Tarzan impression, raised by gorillas. He then talks about his father's boots and how much he admired them. This is a running symbol, with Knight Rider having shoeless, death, tattooed, and toe cutter being the boss, and Mel Gibson is focused on his father's shoes. The very last conversation of the film involves a discussion about stealing a dead man's boots. The symbol of fingers/toes is someone's extra reach in the form of a subordinate. A powerful figure with a hand and each finger symbolizing someone that works for them. Toe cutter, therefore, is someone that goes after those, not going after the head but the fingers and toes. Knight Rider being his subordinate, and he killed cops like Mel Gibson. The piggy toe of the government of this world. His wife asserts his child wants ice cream, and then they get terrorized by toe cutter. Ice cream symbolism. As she escapes, she rips off the hand from the gang member. They rush and leave their spare tire, as she calls him Tarzan again. The baby is kidnapped by the gang. Replacing the hand with the baby/leaving the spare. Remember, the baby was introduced as a monster that punches his mother and then is given a gun to play with. The wife gets run down off screen by the gang as their car no longer moves. They lose the kid, though neither death are shown, and this is where Gibson embraces becoming the monster. The symbol of a baby is used as an op. Gibson becomes a monster is the completion of that op. What we see is from Mel Gibson's perspective. This apocalyptic world might even be in his head, as the title asserts, Mad Max, as in he is literally insane. If not, he certainly becomes it. The way MK Ops work involves communities that abuse an individual in various ways, and setting up a gang to terrorize an individual would be part of it. I've said before I was an MK victim, and so I can confirm this. Bullies as kids become teen gangs and literally home invading criminals during and after that. Part of the play to push psychologically involves people acting as friends or even lovers to best manipulate. They can then put on a play of being a victim to light a fire under the lunatic to go after any specific person desired. The film Memento has that plot point to it. I believe the mother may represent such a handler, as she acted as his one tether to staying sane. As soon as it was cut, he becomes, well, fully insane and goes on a killing spree. Gibson runs down the gang. Pushes toe cutter in front of a semi-truck. And then gives a mentally ill convict a choice to saw through his own leg and possibly survive or die by the fuse he lights. If my reading is right, then this film was acting as a promotion for people to join the MK Ops. This is why it has no heroes and was record-breaking successful. This success also means it likely is used as symbol in other media. One in particular jumps out. The whole plot revolves around the fallout of the death of Knight Rider, and does that name sound familiar? Well, there happened to be a show that had the same name that came out right after the film. Knight Rider invokes this calm because the reason why he had a facelift was to avoid being the target of the mob. He gets a new face to avoid being the target like Gibson was. He then goes after the kinds of criminals that operate above the law with Knight Rider, which looks like Darth Vader's bathroom, he says. A car that can only get into crashes if it is ordered to by the driver. This is comms of surveillance tech. Taking control of MK Ops and using them. The point is in avoiding being hunted, to avoid being in the firing range of a toe cutter gang. Also, South Park has a long-running reference to Mad Max. The most prominent piece of iconography in the main character's room. The Street Warrior, and it even has several versions as they updated it with the modern sequel. This being so prominent from the start of the show helps clarify the relationships. I've already decoded South Park as tied to the surveillance of MK Ops. However, it's specifically the famous sequel, so I had to watch that one to make sure. A film that involves a war between people who control a refinery in the apocalypse versus the hockey mask-led murderers trying to steal it from them. Note Mel Gibson is introduced in this film as a shell of a man. They make a deal with Max, and like in the first film, he kills all the hooligans. The fact that it's Jason-themed gives us clarity on what the problem was. The deployment of that iconography is tied to Jason/Friday the 13th, 1980, much like Halloween, which just like Mad Max debut in 1978. This is employing MK Ops to take on groups that also use MK Ops. It's similar to the plot of Fat Man in that the rich purchase killers to remove people who stand against them. It concludes with the Road Warrior disappearing never to be seen again after saving them. In Mad Max, the way this is done is Max drives a tanker. The finale involves him asking a kid to get a shell so he can kill the leader. Then a hoodlum pops up scaring the kid, and then Max crashes into the leader, taking out the one on the hood with it. This encounter between the kid and hoodlum is set up earlier when the kid kills his relative with a boomerang. The driving force for Max is the kid, and so him getting the shell gives us a possible motivation implied. As in playing into his trauma of losing his child to turn him into a weapon. The hoodlum speaker for the gang tries to catch the boomerang, but it cuts off his fingers. The wielding of the weapon by a child is a perfect reason why South Park would invoke it, as it was a marker for children taking part in MK surveillance. Cartman being the most obvious example in all of fiction of a psychopathic child. This doesn't mean everyone involved in it was taking part in immorality, but at the very least they were monitoring a dangerous individual. So Mel Gibson symbolizes a lunatic? Clearly it's a little more complicated, but well, let's look at his first few roles. His first film role is minor, but it sets up the trend. July 14, 1977. United States House Permanent Select Committee, oversees nation's intel agencies. July 14, 1977. I Never Promised You, a Rose Garden film debut of Mel Gibson. Playing a baseball player's small role in a film about teenager in a mental institution. And the next film. Mad Max is the third film. July 14, 1977. United States House Permanent Select Committee, oversees nation's intel agencies. July 14, 1977. I Never Promised You, a Rose Garden film debut of Mel Gibson. December 21, 1977. DOE establishes Western Area Power Administration with headquarters in Denver, Colorado. December 22, 1977. Summer City debut starring role of Mel Gibson. South Park is set in Colorado, invoking the same symbol. I haven't watched it, nor does the description give enough to go on for me to decode, but I did notice one thing about this film called Summer City. So, Summer City has a sequel called Breaking Loose, and it had this little note about how the writer was unhappy with his prior film, Little Boy Lost, which was based on a true story of a child lost in Australia for 4 days. November 16, 1978. Little Boy Lost. November 16, 1978. Chernobyl criticality. Little Boy and Fat Man. Sound familiar? I went over Fat Man as the plutonium bomb, Little Boy is the uranium one. Dropped from the Enola Gay. Check my nuclear post for more specifics, but the point is it ties into the blackmail that involves controlling people with blackmail using kids. A missing 4-year-old sheep herding Australian child. February 5, 1960. 4-year-old Stephen Walls lost for 4 days. February 9, 1960. 4-year-old Stephen Walls found unites a nation-famous story. February 9, 1960. Agreement of AFL-NFL, no tampering, with contracts, leads to uniting of AFL plus NFL. Symbolism of not interfering. This was the start of the uniting between the two factions, know the player most tied to that time period. Unitas equals Unite US. Most famous for his part in the greatest game ever played. September 3, 1949, detection of the first Soviet nuclear weapon. Plus 4 years. September 3, 1953, little boy lost with Bing Crosby, bombing run film. Plus 4 days. September 7, 1953, Nikita Khrushchev becomes leader for Communist Party. December 27, 1958, Bretton Woods fully operational unites banking. December 28, 1958, greatest game ever played by Unitas sudden death overtime. February 5, 1960, 4-year-old Stephen Walls gets lost in Australia. Plus 4 days. February 9, 1960, 4-year-old Stephen Walls found unites a nation. February 9, 1960, agreement of AFL-NFL, no tampering with contracts, leads to uniting of AFL plus NFL. Seems to be an agreement made between the major players controlling media. Also there was a book and film called Little Boy Lost, Little Boy, First Nuclear Bomb equals Blackmail, Lost. Little Boy Lost. Some of these connections are a lot stronger than others. I always try and make it clear in posts to people that I'm not always right, but I get the feeling some just trust me regardless as they are conditioned to do that. I'd like to free as many minds as possible from that, but teaching critical thinking is tricky. Some patterns get stronger and stronger till it's clear my decoding was 100% accurate, and others revolve around a couple of symbols and historical reconciliation need much more effort put into them to confirm/reject. Nuclear is a good example of a highly confident decode as I've decoded it from so many angles, and it's extremely consistent. For example, here's yet another one. July 1, 1946, Able test Bikini Atoll nuclear. July 5, 1946, bikini invented named after nuclear tests and modeled by a stripper. Effectively defining the symbolism. Meaning they declared the symbol of the nukes by giving a literal definition tied to a stripper exposing herself in ways every other woman they tried refused. That's the official story above. So I'd like for you to be able to understand when I'm spitballing and spent all of 10 seconds on a hypothesis versus something extremely clear and solid. I can't very well always have a disclaimer, but what I can do is give a challenge, so you can improve. Challenge section, Hansel and Gretel. Occasionally I give my students a challenge, but up until now I've never included them in the posts. I doubt anyone will try it, but if by chance you want to test yourself, this is a good avenue as it's a famous story, and it's only 6 pages long. Starting at page 99. This story is from 1812, and usually I would expect that to make it extremely difficult, but it remains a famous piece of fiction due to how timeless the symbolism is. It's not about blackmail, so don't bother trying to interpret it that way. I've underlined a few parts of note. The story has 2 sections necessary to understand. The first phase involves the kids plus stepmother. Starving family has too many people in it to eat. Kids overhear stepmother's plan to kill them to save food. Stepmother gives Hansel food as bait to strand them in forest. Kids outsmart stepmother and return to the cabin in the woods. Stepmother again plots to kill the children the same way, which kids again overhear. Stepmother locks child inside to prevent getting shiny rocks to use as trail. Kids attempt to use breadcrumb trail to return home but fail. The kids then move on to phase 2 of the story as they find a candy house with an evil witch in it. Phase 2 of the story is as follows. Kids begin eating candy house of witch. Witch is upset about house being eaten and decides to eat the children. Hansel is given food by the witch with the understanding he will be killed soon. Witch is tricked by Gretel and cooked alive. Kids loot the house. Kids ride a duck one at a time home. Kids return to father happily ever after. How happily ever after? Well, as it turns out, the stepmother mysteriously died when they were at the witch house. What does this mean? Note one of the claims to fame of this story is coining breadcrumb trail, yet their trail failed, didn't it? No. Actually, that's the point of the story. The most important part is it's all one story. There is no such thing as a magical witch with a candy house. The story can be read literally until that point, at which point it switches into a symbolic retelling of events as a way to duck jail. The key to unlocking the whole story is simply this. Mother equals witch. Evil stepmother wants to kill stepkids for eating them out of house and home. They practically say that in literal terms early in the story, and it's reflected in the eating of the house a witch lives in. Kids recognize they are going to be killed and instead kill her. The mother mysteriously dies exactly when they kill the witch. It makes no sense in context of the story except for the fact the entire story was really about that. The stories have a ton of parallels for a good reason. Hansel gets locked in by both the witch and the mother. Hansel gets bread from the mother twice, and both times as tricks to kill him in the forest. Young girls at that time surely helped with cleaning, and so it gave away to make an accident. The first thing they do after killing the witch is ride a duck, as in they avoid consequences typically expected. I go over that in every other post as it's very consistent, and the very end they say if anyone sees a mouse, they will kill it. I.e., if anyone rats, they'll go after them next. The story when we simply converge the mother and witch character fits like a puzzle piece in such a way that I have no doubt it's the correct solution. You don't realize the two characters die at the same time because it rushes past that point in the story. It's funny when you know the trick because the whole driving force of the story for the first 1/4 is the mother and then the witch, and then suddenly we get this tiny sentence about how she died and so everything is okay now. At the end they get food and money. The point there is the mother wanted to kill the kids for more food for herself. Just like how the kids getting a tiny bit of bread equals gingerbread house eating, so too is killing her equals money/food. After all, they needed less mouths to feed, and an adult mouth costs/feeds a lot more than a child. So by killing her they also fixed the problem of food/money in the exact same way the mother wanted to. There are some Hansel and Gretel in pop culture. This game I found, for example, a coded book and when decoded fairy tales, with Gretel acting as a diviner to see the future. Symbolism of seeing their death coming and taking action to prevent it. The most popular version of Hansel and Gretel is also worth noting. It just so happened to begin around the same time a famous young girl killed her stepmother. August 4, 1892, Lizzie Borden murder of stepmother. June 20, 1893, Lizzie Borden found not guilty of murder of stepmother and father. December 23, 1893, Hansel and Gretel famous play. Note how she burned her dress in the kitchen stove, and likely did it likely for inheritance. The symbol works quite well. Likely the media frenzy was coordinated with this play as a guide. Anyway, I might decode some more of those fairy tales in the future. Like for example, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, everywhere that Mary went the lamb was sure to go. Fleece obtains a great deal of money from someone, typically by overcharging or swindling them. How is this used in pop culture? Well, the very first recording. Getting everyone to follow suit in the future, as in the symbol was of everyone following him and doing what he is demonstrating. The populace being sheep, though that's not necessarily a pejorative in this context. Also in that song later versions the repetition adding more verses with Mary had a little lamb adds to the symbol of there being multiple people involved following. Okay, let's talk about current news. Updates, Tate and Greta. This last week Elon Musk tweeted a Matrix meme. Tate says Greta Thunberg has been taught. Musk replies that to escape the Matrix you have to unlearn what you have been taught. That's not unusual, but notice that just before it Andrew Tate made a reference to the Matrix in a highly reported feud with Greta Thunberg. There are countless Matrix memes either one could have made, but Musk chose to make one that acted as a perfect reply to Andrew Tate. I discuss this concept of critical thinking frequently. This is the larger point of Tate versus Greta. Who decides who gets a voice? Why has Greta of all people been elevated into stardom for scowling at the masses that eat cows? Greta is a redux of The Girl Who Silenced the World for 5 Minutes, in 1992. A girl who said at the UN that she was afraid to go outside because of the hole in the ozone and afraid to breathe the air. This is what is taught and weaponized. You may have broken free of brainwash of this level, but if you simply take what I say as gospel, then you can't really say you are free of it yet. I will tell you I have your best interests at heart, but so too will all the others. This is why the one thing I can do, that truth can do, is survive critical thinking. This is why I suggest you apply critical thinking and challenge assertions made, and that includes me. I don't want to be believed, I want to be right, and so it helps me when you do this. Anyway, Andrew Tate was arrested for human trafficking due to his spat with Greta Thunberg. These are all shows. Andrew Tate's father was ex-CIA that held the record for fastest learning of Russian. He was also a grand master at chess, and so perhaps I'll have to dig into chess soon. It's a good thing for him to be arrested for human trafficking because he was CIA. No, not because he's CIA, I just wanted to illustrate that he's playing a role. But it is a good thing. If you read my last post, you know that notable figures have been having a never-ending train of terrible news. Individuals like Elon Musk, Kanye West, Donald Trump. With Musk plus Elon losing more than $1 billion. Both Kanye and Trump having popularity declines due to reported anti-Semitism and all being investigated. These are examples, this could be you. These examples work best the more visible they are. This is why the largest figures are doing it in various capacities. It sends a message to comms aware what they can expect in the near future. If they aren't cooperating. Andrew Tate is small, but his fame became pronounced when he was banned from social media. Note how he travels from account to account, like the rest he is giving examples. That they won't be able to evade banning. Each of the major people giving a different way they'll be gone after. Tate, arrests plus social media bans, Tate, and note his fame largely came due to being banned. Trump, investigations/scandals. Kanye, endorsement losing plus social media backlash, and so on. It works doubly well for the future because the narrative is of an oppressive regime. If Trump had won 2020, and we saw no movement, his support would have collapsed. Instead, they retained their position as outsiders, which effectively puts the entire operation on ice for when it's ready to go again. They endure terrible news, but it's not going to last forever. This is why Musk said, "There's stormy weather ahead, but then it's gonna be sunshine thereafter," on December 22nd. The constant stream of high-profile celebrity deaths is a part of it. April 9, 2021. Prince Philip death, 99 years on the 99th day. April 9, 2021. ISS arrival. Prince Philip dying at age 99 on the 99th day, same day Musk provided transport to the ISS. I've gone over that one and others many times, but I'm always finding more. August 27, 2019. Barry expelled by English Football League after takeover collapses. August 27, 2019. NSA PSL, paid sick leave tweets. August 29, 2019. CIA PSL, anticipating things before they happen. That PSL tweet I've gone over in other contexts as it demonstrated an awareness of COVID coming. What I couldn't figure out until now is what specific event it was referencing. This expelling of Barry seems plausible given what we've gone over in football. April 25, 2019. Barry team put on open market after inability to pay players. April 24, 2019. Vital penguin breeding site in Antarctica drastically losing mating pairs. August 27, 2019. Barry FC expelled membership EFL League Football. August 27, 2019. NSA PSL. Antarctica is used to symbolize foreign/domestic ops that involve concealing locations. This is why it works as Linux mascot, it being timed in this way of losing breeding site, fits with the bankruptcy. Wiki, Barry were the first club to be expelled from the Football League since Maidstone United in 1992. Early in the post I went into the change with the 1992 league disbanding and reformed. How this tied into the larger media changes. February 20, 1992. Premier League top teams split away from the 1988 Football League for lucrative TV rights from Sky. February 20, 1992, Ross Perot announced on Larry King his presidential campaign. Okay. I still have a long way to go before I'll understand it, but we are making steady progress. Speaking of Antarctica. Zimmer. So the top creator on YouTube is MrBeast, and his most recent video involved a trip to Antarctica and a surprise soundtrack by Hans Zimmer. In the last post I discussed MrBeast in relation Markiplier, as they had a recent comm that overlapped involving trains. They are in many ways the top of each field, with Markiplier being the top gaming channel. The point is, I had been aware of the two sending comms tied to the same underlying things. This is why it didn't surprise me when the video Markiplier released after MrBeast did his Zimmer video began with a parody of Hans Zimmer. A game he put off on playing for weeks to pick back up to time this comm to it. The context of the game is that Hans Zimmer plays music to keep safe and prevent a rift from growing larger. If you get him to stop playing music, the house becomes haunted. You have to go into the basement with Zimmer's key to fix it. The circle of furniture parallels the downstairs circle of vibrations. By stopping the music, it weakens the creature enough that you can rip a crystal out of it. A crystal which compels, like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. Note the circle involves symbols I've gone over that tie into controlled operatives, like how T is used to represent church coordinated ops. This is symbolism of coordinated groups of people. Just like how Zimmer's music in films coordinates the action. The symbol here seems to be about keeping the music going as a defense, and all of this is changing. Notice in the Antarctic video it involves a tease for the next videos, with the most anticipated being, Blind Man Sees for the First Time. Blind Man Sees for the First Time. That sounds like a spectacular symbol for something good to come. Maybe the public. Or a test run of someone fully sheep exposed to it. I do what I can here, but I know these posts are a huge investment. One day I'll streamline them. Anyway. Antarctica is owned by a large group of countries. July 4, 1819. First Russian Antarctic expedition leaves to prove or disprove the existence of Antarctica. July 4, 1819. Last telescopic observation of 1819 comet. Based on my decoding, it also doesn't exist, at least not in the way people think. It's forbidden to go there for a reason, because there is no there. Check this post for more on that. The short answer is it is used as the excuse of where people are when they are in hiding. As in the same country or a foreign one, it makes sure nobody looks for them. This is why when Nazis came into the country with paperclip, there was a sudden need to use a symbolic Antarctic research base to discuss it. Effectively masking conversation inside the government to avoid leaks. Though come to think of it, I suppose bringing someone to where Antarctica is supposed to be would be a quick way to have Blind Man see, though, to be honest, I thought they were going to just bring one of the dead people back to life, but there are so many ways this could all go. That's why I'll keep going as hard and fast as I can. These posts are a travesty compared to what they could be, but they are the best I can do without slowing down my studies. If the military doesn't have a good enough plan to wake people up, at least I'm here to get it done in some limited capacity. Anyway, that's it for this post. Happy New Year. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been International Sports, the other football.